Good day, everyone. I hope that you are all doing well after that massive earthquake that affected most of our brothers and sisters in the northern part of Cebu. Let's continue to pray because aftershocks are still going on. Um, so, since the president of the University of Cebu announced that this week everything will be all online classes, so I decided to record this PowerPoint presentation or this lecture so that those who are still struggling to have a good internet connection, will not be able to find it difficult, to attend the online class. But instead, just download this video and watch it over and over again so that you will be familiar with the lecture today. Okay, so the topic that I'm going to discuss would be heart failure. Okay. So heart failure, sometimes known as CHF or congestive heart failure. The word congestive is actually referring to the most common type of heart failure, which is left-sided, that results in pulmonary congestion. Okay. Is a long-term condition, which means this is chronic, in which your heart cannot pump blood well enough to meet your body's needs. That means the demand is high, but the supply is low. Okay, but in this particular condition, the heart is still working. It's just that it cannot handle the amount of blood that it should. Okay, that's why blood builds up in other parts of your body. Well, depending on the type of heart failure present, most of the time it collects in your lungs, legs, and feet. So what are the causes, identified causes of congestive heart failure? One of which is coronary artery disease. Coronary artery disease, like atherosclerosis, impairs the delivery of oxygenated blood to the myocardium, significantly reducing the amount, causing myocardial damage that would eventually lead to MI or myocardial infarction and eventually heart attack or heart failure. Another is cardiomyopathy, which we discussed previously. Regardless whether it's genetic or viral cardiomyopathy, then a person who is born with structural heart defects or congenital heart disease would also be prone to heart failure. Okay, those with diabetes mellitus and hypertension because of endothelial injury that could also lead to, myocardial ischemia are also prone to this. Also, those with kidney disease because of the problem with fluid and electrolyte balance, that could also add burden to the heart's ability to pump. Then those who are obese with BMI higher than 30. Okay, another cause of congestive heart failure is tobacco and recreational drug use. We learned previously that tobacco, alcohol, and drugs can cause sympathetic nervous system stimulation that could trigger the release of catecholamines. These neurotransmitters called catecholamines can cause vasoconstriction, increase in heart rate, and, well, damage to the heart eventually. And as well as those people um, with cancer who are receiving chemotherapeutic drugs. Remember that chemotherapeutic drugs doesn't have the selective toxicity property, so it will not only kill the cancer cells, but it will also affect the other organs in our body that are not supposed to be affected with with drugs in general. So what are the risk factors for congestive heart failure? Okay, being older than 65. Well, the wear and tear principle will explain this very well. Using tobacco products, cocaine, or alcohol. Those with inactive or sedentary lifestyle because of poor circulation. Okay. Well, having an inactive or sedentary lifestyle will also always lead to obesity. And then eating foods that have a lot of salt and fat. saturated fat, and salt. Salt can cause water retention, so it increases your blood plasma volume, which will also have a direct effect on the pumping action of the heart. And then fats, okay, especially saturated fats, because these are the contributing factors to the development of plaques that will develop in the intima lining of the coronary arteries. Having a high blood pressure is also another risk factor, knowing that it can cause endothelial injury and coronary artery disease. Well, they're both related, and also having a heart attack and a family history of congestive heart failure. Okay, so this is a uh, conceptual framework presentation of the pathophysiology of heart failure. So you have there the causes: heart damage, ventricular overload, and decreased ventricular contraction. Well, mostly secondary to myocardial infarction. So with this, the sympathetic nervous system division of the nervous system will be forced to compensate, okay? And the compensation that the sympathetic nervous system makes would include tachycardia. This is to, this is to correct the decreased pumping action of the myocardium. So it will, the baroreceptors basically are the ones responsible for the stimulation of the sympathetic nervous system, which causes tachycardia. And then, um, well, eventually when the heart overworks, no, it can also lead to ventricular dilatation and myocardial hypertrophy. Okay, but the enlargement of the myocardium does not necessarily mean or doesn't necessarily guarantee or assure a better performance. Okay, once the myocardial tissues are overstretched, they will also lose their contractile strength, causing the heart's ability to pump blood to become less effective. Therefore, it will lead to decrease in cardiac output. Okay, so decreased cardiac output will also lead to decreased organ tissue perfusion, causing decreased renal perfusion. So decreased renal perfusion means that blood supply to the kidneys is significantly decreased, while causing a decrease also in glomerular filtration rate. So the amount of blood that is being filtered will determine the amount of urine that will be formed by the kidneys. So this means that because there is decreased cardiac output, so decreased pod urine production. Okay, that's why sodium, which is the excess sodium, which is supposed to be eliminated by the kidneys, will be retained in the body. Okay, so there will be sodium retention, and of course, wherever sodium goes, water follows, as they say. That's why there will be an increased osmotic pressure, okay, and leading also to increased production of antidiuretic hormone. So sodium is responsible for water retention, and then ADH, this is a hormone, okay, that is produced by the posterior pituitary gland. Um, yes, posterior pituitary gland that is also responsible for water reabsorption. That's why there is fluid overload. Okay, so again, depending on the type of heart failure, okay, fluid backs up, okay, in the different parts of the body. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, there are two types of heart failure: congestive heart failure, right-sided heart failure, and left-sided heart failure. Again, heart failure is when there is reduced volume of oxygen-rich blood pumped to the body, which causes the left ventricle to become dilated because because there is lesser amount of cardiac output, so blood there will be a residual blood volume in the left ventricle after contraction. So during the diastolic filling, the left ventricle will only be filled with a little amount of blood. That's why it will lead to backward failure. So most blood will congest the lungs, causing pulmonary congestion. That's why if you will try to look at the picture here in the left-sided heart failure, most of the signs and symptoms here are related to respiratory difficulties. Okay, so left side heart failure occurs if the heart cannot pump enough oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body. Okay, and the failure of the left ventricle will cause either pulmonary congestion or a disturbance in the respiratory control mechanisms. And these problems in turn will precipitate respiratory distress. Okay, so obviously, ang pasyente ani would have difficulty in breathing, will be in respiratory distress, also known as air hunger. Okay, so the degree of the distress will also vary with the client's position. That's why positioning here is a big factor. Okay, activity and the level of stress. Okay, activity because dyspnea here is usually exertional in nature. Okay, as well as stress. Now, the right-sided heart failure occurs if the heart cannot pump enough blood to the lungs to pick up oxygen. Meaning, okay, as soon as blood returns to the heart, the right side of the heart, particularly the right ventricle, is supposed to pump blood, that deoxygenated blood into the lungs to be oxygenated. But because of pulmonary congestion, blood will not be able to enter the lungs, but instead, uh, you know, moves backward. That's why failure of the right ventricle may occur in response to left-sided CHF. So this is actually a consequence of left-sided heart failure, okay, or as a result of pulmonary embolism. So right ventricular failure results in peripheral edema because blood will not be able to return to the heart. So it will be accommodated in the highly distensible organs like the liver. Okay, that's why there is peripheral edema, venous congestion of the organs as well. Okay, so this picture enumerates the different signs and symptoms of both types of heart failure. So in the left-sided heart failure, there is paroxysmal nocturnal dyspnea, also known as PND. The word paroxysmal means sudden, nocturnal because it usually occurs at night when the client, assumes a reclined position. And then there's also an elevated pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, and then pulmonary congestion as evidenced by cough, crackles, okay, upon auscultation, wheezes, blood-tinged sputum. Actually, a blood-tinged sputum is a late manifestation of heart failure. And then there's also tachypnea because the body has to compensate for decreased oxygen level in the blood. So breathing will increase. And then there's also restlessness, okay, because of decreased cardiac output. There will also be a decrease in blood supply to the brain, also known as brain tissue perfusion or cerebral perfusion. That's why there is restlessness. There's also confusion. Orthopnea is difficulty in breathing when a client, assumes a reclining position. That's why most patients with left-sided heart failure prefer to be positioned in Fowler's, semi or high, it depends. Okay, and then there's also tachycardia, exertional dyspnea, fatigue, and cyanosis. Well, cyanosis is because of less oxygenated blood goes into the body. Okay, for the right-sided heart failure, also known as cor pulmonale, there is fatigue. Okay, there's also increase in peripheral venous pressure, ascites, because of blood, pooling in the peritoneal cavity. There's also hepatosplenomegaly, or the enlargement of both the liver and spleen, because these two organs can, accommodate an excess blood supply. Okay, then the signs and symptoms of right-sided heart failure may also be secondary to chronic pulmonary problems. Okay, one of the classic signs of right-sided heart failure would be jugular vein distension or distended jugular veins. There's also anorexia and complaints of GI distress because of congestion of the abdominal organs. And then there's also weight gain. Weight gain is not actually because the patient's appetite is increased, but weight gain here is because of accumulated fluid or edema. Okay, and of course, dependent edema. So if a patient with chronic heart failure or with congestive heart failure is still ambulatory, okay, fluid will accumulate usually in the legs. But if the patient is bedridden, usually edema occurs in the sacral area. Okay, so let's proceed to medications. Now, the main problem in heart failure is the ability of the heart, okay, to pump enough blood, or the ability of the myocardium to generate enough force, okay, to make the contractions a little strong. That's why a medication called Digitalis, okay, is prescribed. Okay, this is the major therapy for patients with chronic heart failure because Digitalis has a positive inotropic and negative chronotropic effects. What does that mean? Okay, inotropic means the force of myocardial contraction. Chronotropic means the heart rate. So this drug will improve the quality of myocardial contraction, but it does not increase the heart rate. Why? Why should it not increase the heart rate? Remember that an increase in heart rate would also increase the myocardial oxygen demand. Okay? And the problem here is not about the ability of the heart to contract, but it's the quality of the contraction that is affected. Okay? That's why Digitalis is given, okay, is prescribed. So, before this drug is started, you have to assess first the heart rate before the administration of Digitalis. And if the heart rate of the patient is below 60 and above 120 beats per minute, then you have to withhold the medication and inform the doctor. You can even question, okay, the doctor's prescription of Digitalis if the serum potassium level of the patient is less than 3.5. Remember that the normal serum potassium level is 3.5 to 5.0 MEq per liter. Okay, why? Why is serum potassium very important? Because when the serum potassium level of the patient is lower than 3.5, meaning the patient is hypokalemic, then it enhances the Digitalis, the possibility of Digitalis toxicity. Okay, so well, another possible reason that could also contribute to decreased serum potassium level is one of the medications that are commonly given to patients with heart failure, and that would be diuretics, especially if the patient is receiving or is taking a loop diuretic. Loop diuretic like furosemide or Lasix is very effective in eliminating excesses in sodium and potassium. That's why if serum potassium level is an issue, then the doctor would usually prescribe the non-potassium the potassium sparing diuretic, which is spironolactone. Okay, so to avoid the possibility of Digitalis toxicity, we have to assess first, okay, the serum potassium level of the patient. So if it's within the normal range, then the administration could proceed. But still, we need to monitor and assess for signs and symptoms of Digitalis toxicity. So usually, the early signs of Digitalis toxicity are related to GI symptoms. So there are GI manifestations like anorexia, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Then it can also cause bradycardia, and the most dangerous, okay, the most dangerous side effect, okay, or symptom of Digitalis toxicity, which is usually precipitated by hypokalemia, are dysrhythmias. Okay, so the late sign of Digitalis toxicity would include alteration in visual perceptions, wherein your patient will usually tell you that he or she is seeing green or yellow vision or halos around the light among elderly. Okay? In males, it can also lead to gynecomastia. This is enlargement of the breast in males, decreased libido, and impotence. Okay, then another medication would be diuretics. Okay. Diuretics are given to decrease cardiac workload by reducing the circulating volume and thereby reduce preload. Remember that there is congestion. There will always be congestion regardless of what type of heart failure is present. If it's left-sided, there's pulmonary congestion. If it's right-sided, there is systemic venous congestion. Okay, that's why diuretics are given to get rid of the excess fluid in the body, because an increase in fluid, okay, in body fluid could also increase the workload of the heart. Okay, so diuretics are given to decrease again the workload by reducing the circulating volume and also reducing the preload. Okay, but first and foremost, you need to assess for signs and symptoms for hypokalemia with administering diuretics and loop thiazide diuretics and loop diuretics. Okay, so if and when the doctor prescribes a loop diuretic, because when edema is a bit severe, okay, loop diuretics are very effective. Okay, this is more powerful than potassium-sparing diuretics. So if the diuretic that is prescribed by the doctor is a loop diuretic, then you have to make sure that your patient will also be getting or receiving potassium-rich foods like bananas. Okay, actually, potassium-rich foods are uh, best remembered with the acronym CROWDS. CROWDS. C meaning cantaloupes, R raisins, sorry, O oranges, okay, W watermelons, D dates, and S spinach. Okay, pwede ra pud saging para di mo makalimot. Okay, now, because diuretics increases the frequency and amount of urination, diuretics are best administered early morning so that at night your patient's sleep will not be disturbed. Okay? So diuretics are administered early morning and or early afternoon to prevent sleep pattern disturbance related to nocturia. If thiazides are ineffective, an oral aldosterone antagonist or potassium-sparing diuretic may be given with thiazide. So if the diuretics used in the treatment are as follows. If it's diuretics, you have the HCTZ, or also known as hydrochlorothiazide, and then you have the chlorothiazide. Loop diuretics, the most popular of which is furosemide or Lasix, and potassium-sparing diuretic. An example of this would be spironolactone or aldactone. Okay, vasodilators are also given to decrease afterload. When you say afterload, it is the pressure, okay? Arterial pressure, okay? When blood is that will be met by blood when it is ejected from the ventricle. So vasodilators are given to decrease the afterload by decreasing the resistance to ventricular emptying. And the most commonly used drugs are nitroprazide, hydralazine, nifedipine, captopril, and other sympathomimetic drugs like dopamine and dobutamine. Okay, now together with drugs, there are also non-pharmacologic treatments that would include diet. The diet of the patient must be sodium restricted to prevent fluid excess. So what are sodium-rich foods? What are examples of sodium-rich foods? Basically, foods that are um, canned, foods that are preserved, cured, like bacon, meats, no, that are cured, like bacons, hot dogs, what else? Hams, okay, are rich in sodium. Okay, in a daily average diet, we usually consume 3 to 4 grams of sodium. So when a patient is on a sodium restricted diet, the patient is usually allowed only to no more than 2 grams of sodium per day. Okay, so 2 grams ra gyud, 1 to 2 grams ra gyud ang sodium sa pasyente. If mas maayo pa gani, mga less than 2 or 1 gram na lang yun per day of sodium, because it defeats the purpose, no, of giving the patient diuretics if ang iyahang diet would still be high in sodium. Okay, and then oxygen therapy also to increase oxygen supply. Remember that because of pulmonary congestion, the oxygenation of blood in the lungs is severely affected as well. So let's go now to the nursing management. The first is, of course, to provide oxygenation. O2 saturation or O2 saturation will tell you that your patient is having oxygenation problems, no? So oxygen therapy is usually given per cannula, per nasal cannula at 2 to 6 liters per minute, because The problem basically here is oxygen. But you also need to evaluate ABG analysis results. Okay? So the ABG result, the arterial blood gas result, will tell you if your oxygenation, your supplemental oxygenation therapy is effective. Okay? And also maintain the patient in semi-Fowler's position, because this position will not create pressure against the chest of the patient, and this position will also promote maximum lung expansion. Okay. Another nursing management is to promote rest and activity. Okay. Bed rest or limited activity may also be necessary during the acute phase. Remember that bed rest will also promote diuresis. So together with diuretics and sodium restricted diet, bed rest will also help address the problem of overload, fluid overload. You can also administer diazepam as ordered by the doctor to allay the apprehension of the patient. Remember that a patient with heart failure would usually be anxious now because of the uncertainty of his condition. There's always difficulty in breathing and sometimes irregular heartbeats, which can contribute to the client's fear and apprehension. Gradual ambulation is also encouraged, although bed rest is prescribed, but gradual ambulation is encouraged. This is also to prevent one of the complications of prolonged immobilization, called deep vein thrombosis, okay, and also embolism due to prolonged immobility. You also need to assess for signs of activity intolerance such as dyspnea, fatigue, and increased pulse rate that does not stabilize readily. Okay, another big factor that we need to look into, okay, or another big problem that we need to look into is the patient's anxiety. That's why we need to identify feelings and concerns related to those feelings. You have to ask the patient what makes him or what causes him to become anxious. Okay, you have to um, encourage the patient to verbalize his concerns, identify the strengths that can be used for coping, and learn what can be done to decrease anxiety. You may uh, instruct the patient, or you may inform the patient about several certain relaxation techniques that can help make the patient calm. Okay, and then you also need to facilitate fluid balance. Okay, the measurement of intake and output is very crucial here. Okay, so with diuretics, you have to, of course, expect that the urine output of the patient is not only 30 cc per hour. It should be more than 30 cc per hour, knowing that the patient is on diuretics. But first and foremost, you have to control sodium intake. Avoid salt-cured foods. Um, what else? Um, Canned goods, okay? Canned, even fruit juices that are canned are also rich in sodium. Okay, administer diuretics and digitalis also as prescribed. Monitor intake and output, the weight and the vital signs. Now, for the weight, usually patients would have weight gain. Okay, that is expected because of edema, but a dramatic increase of weight, like let's say 2 to 5 pounds in over a week, over a period of 1 week, is something that you need to report to the doctor. Okay? And then provide skin care, because edema to skin is poorly nourished and susceptible to pressure sores. You have to change the position of the patient at frequent intervals, like usually it's every 2 hours. Okay? Then you can also provide a turning schedule to the patient's watcher or the significant other. You can even post it beside the patient's bed, no, on the wall, okay, beside the patient's bed, so that who is involved, okay, in taking care of the patient would be aware of the position changes expected every 2 hours. Then you also need to assess the sacral area regularly for signs of pressure sores. Use protective devices to prevent pressure sores. I don't know if you are familiar with an egg crate mattress. Kana bitang muraog foam nga ang foam siya actually nga mura siya butanganan og itlog. Okay, that is called an egg crate mattress, and that is usually prescribed to patients who are bedridden or comatose. Okay, then promote nutrition. Provide a bland Bland because it's supposed to be low sodium. Okay, low calorie, low residue with vitamin supplement during the acute phase. Okay, patients would usually not be able to tolerate large meals. So instead, you can provide frequent small feedings, okay, to minimize exertion and reduce GI blood requirements. There may also be a need to severely restrict sodium intake of the client who receives diuretic. However, no added salt diet is prescribed. Salty foods must be omitted. Then, we also need to promote elimination. Now, one major concern here is the Valsalva maneuver. Valsalva maneuver increases cardiac workload, but it significantly decreases the heart rate. That's why patients with heart failure are not supposed to strain at defecation. So how are we going to make this possible? Well, one of the one of the things that can contribute to straining at stool is, of course, constipation. Now, constipation can be prevented by, asking the patient or by telling the patient to increase his oral fluid intake. But that is not applicable in this case because your patient is having fluid volume overload. That's why um, instead of, you know, instead of asking the patient to increase his oral fluid intake, you can just probably encourage the patient to include roughage in his diet or fiber-rich foods, okay, like leafy vegetables, green leafy vegetables and fruits, okay, are rich in fiber. And also, laxatives are usually prescribed as well. Okay, laxatives are best given at night or at hours of sleep so that when the patient wakes up in the morning, the first agenda is to eliminate his bowel. Okay, and encourage the use of bedtime commode instead of allowing the patient to go to the bathroom. Okay, then if acute pulmonary edema will occur in a client with CHF, the following are the appropriate management. One, place the patient in high Fowler's position. Okay, morphine sulfate 10 to 15 milligrams per IV as ordered will be given to allay the anxiety, to reduce the preload as well as to reduce afterload. Well, I also have read that morphine sulfate can cause coronary artery vasospasm. Oxygen therapy at 40% to 70% by nasal cannula or face mask, and aminophylline via IV. Aminophylline is a bronchodilator drug that is commonly given intravenously to relieve bronchospasm, also increase urinary output and increase cardiac output. Okay, then rapid digitalization. This is to improve, the myocardial contractility, the force of myocardial contractility, thereby also increasing the cardiac output. Okay. And then vasodilators are also given to reduce arterial pressure, decrease hypertension, and also improve the cardiac output and decrease the cardiac workload. Dopamine or dobutamine are also given. This is again to improve the force of myocardial contraction. But we also need to monitor frequently serum potassium level again because diuresis may result to hypokalemia, and hypokalemia can also be a contributing factor to digitalis toxicity. Okay, now the American Heart Society has classified, okay, heart failure based on functional capacity. So a patient who belongs to class 1 is a patient with cardiac disease but without resulting limitations of physical activity, meaning physical activity does not cause undue fatigue, palpitations, dyspnea, or anginal pain. So basically, when a patient with heart failure is in class 1, there are no restrictions of um, what we call the ordinary ADLs, activities of daily living. In class 2, ang pasyente, na ay cardiac disease, okay, but ang limitation sa iyahang activities of daily living is only very slight. Okay? So, most patients with heart failure in class 2 are comfortable at rest. Okay? Ordinary physical activity will result in fatigue, palpitation, dyspnea, or anginal pain. But they are usually relieved when they rest. Class 3, okay, results in marked limitation of physical activity. They are still comfortable at rest, but even the less than ordinary physical activity will already cause them to have fatigue, palpitation, dyspnea, or angina pain. What are less than ordinary physical activity? Like your grooming, no, your daily routine, like brushing the teeth, okay, combing your hair, taking a bath, will already cause the patient to have fatigue, palpitation, dyspnea, or angina pain. What is worse is when a patient belongs to class 4. Okay, in class 4, okay, in class 4, there is already an inability to carry on physical activity without discomfort. So any activity, slight or strenuous, will already cause the patient to have the symptoms, even at rest. Okay, so if any physical activity is undertaken, then the discomfort is also increased. There's also another classification based, there's also another classification of heart failure based on therapeutic classification. Class A, patients are with cardiac disease whose ordinary physical activity need not be restricted. So wala restriction. Class B, okay, na ay cardiac disease whose ordinary physical activity need not be restricted, but ang pasyente ani should be advised against severe or competitive physical efforts. Okay, ang class C, na ay sakit ang pasyente whose ordinary physical activity should be moderately restricted na, whose more strenuous effort should be discontinued. Ang class D, okay, ordinary physical activity are already markedly restricted. Ang pinaka-worst is ang class E because ang pasyente ani should be at complete rest, meaning no activities are allowed, and the patient is usually confined to bed or chair. So